Welcome, the anointed ones. Some fires burn houses, but others burn the hands of those foolish enough to light them. Chosen ones, let me tell you something chilling. Every act of cruelty they put you through wasn't just recorded in the shadows of your memory. It was echoed in the halls of heaven. Torture doesn't dissolve into silence. It multiplies into consequences. Science itself proves that energy never dies. It only transfers. And the agony they forced on you is now ricocheting back into their own lives, amplified. They thought they were watching you burn, but in reality, they were setting themselves ablaze. And here's the twist that makes it both tragic and darkly funny. They treated your pain like a playground, but forgot that God doesn't rent swings to bullies. They believed their fire was under control, but they accidentally summoned a wildfire. Now they're running around with buckets the size of teacups, trying to contain flames they can't even name. So buckle up, because tonight we're going to expose why their torture wasn't just cruelty. It was provocation. They angered God himself, and in doing so they lit a fire that doesn't die down. It only spreads. Number one, they didn't just hurt you, they challenged heaven's order. They didn't just hurt you, they challenged heaven's order. That's the part they never understood. To them, it looked like they were picking on someone weaker, someone isolated, someone they thought had no shield. But what they failed to realize is that chosen ones are not ordinary people walking the earth alone. You are connected to a divine blueprint, and your very existence is woven into a higher design. Hurting you wasn't just about betrayal, cruelty, or manipulation. It was rebellion against the one who placed you here. When they mocked you, when they conspired against you, when they tortured you, they weren't just fighting flesh and blood. They were declaring war against the one who wrote your name into existence. Heaven's order is not random. Every chosen one is strategically positioned, carrying purpose that affects generations. When they tried to crush you, they weren't just harming a single individual. They were interfering with the release of blessings, revelations, and breakthroughs tied to your calling. That's why their actions carry consequences far heavier than what meets the eye. They thought they were silencing one voice, but they were attempting to mute a whole frequency that heaven ordained. And heaven doesn't take interference lightly. Here's the irony. In their small minds, they thought they had power over you. They thought they could control the narrative, dictate how far you go, or reduce your life to their cruelty. But the very act of oppressing you wasn't just mistreatment. It was a direct insult to the authority of God. It was them standing up and saying, "We can override divine choice." That's not just arrogance, it's cosmic rebellion. And rebellion at that level never goes unpunished. This is why their downfall is unavoidable. They may still laugh in public, they may still posture as if they're winning, but their fight isn't against you anymore. It's against heaven itself. They touched what was untouchable. They tampered with what was sacred. And in doing so, they crossed a line that human hands should never cross. That's why they can't control the fire they lit. It's not just your wrath or your strength coming against them. It's the entire weight of divine order correcting itself. And when heaven responds, no one escapes untouched. Number two, torture against you is recorded in a realm they can't access. Torture against you is recorded in a realm they can't access. That's the truth they never considered while they were plotting against you. In their arrogance, they believed what they did would fade into memory, brushed away with time, or buried under denial and excuses. But chosen ones don't live only in the physical world. Your life has always been mirrored in the spiritual, and every moment of suffering, every betrayal, every calculated cruelty has been etched into records that no human hand can tamper with. Earthly courts may be bribed, people may lie, memories may fade, but heaven's archives are untouched and incorruptible. Nothing disappears there. What they thought was silence from above was actually surveillance. They assumed no one saw when they lied about you, when they mocked you behind closed doors, when they put you through unnecessary pain. But in the realm they cannot reach, every action was weighed, every word was documented, and every intention was preserved. And here's where the weight of it sinks in. These records aren't collected to make you feel better. They're stored as evidence. Evidence for judgment. Evidence that cannot be twisted, cannot be deleted, cannot be rewritten by gossip or opinion. This is why chosen ones don't need to chase revenge. The evidence is already stacked so high against those who wronged you that their own lives are now testifying against them. They walk around like nothing happened, but their shadow carries the receipts. The very realm they mocked and ignored has preserved their crimes in perfect detail. And when the time comes, that evidence won't just haunt them, it will bury them. The arrogance of your enemies was rooted in their belief that what happens in private stays hidden. They thought they could control the narrative, silence your truth, and escape consequence. But divine records don't care about their reputation. They don't care about the lies they've spun to make themselves look innocent. The realm they can't access has no bias, no favoritism, no loopholes. The truth stands there, unbending and eternal. This is why their downfall is inevitable. It's not your word against theirs. It's their actions against the evidence of heaven. And no human can appeal against that verdict. Number 3, their fire didn't burn you, it branded them. Their fire didn't burn you, it branded them. That's the twist they never saw coming. They launched attacks thinking they were destroying you, thinking that if they could just turn up the heat enough, you'd collapse. But chosen ones are built from something different. Instead of being consumed, you came out stronger, purified, and more resilient. The flames they set didn't accomplish their mission, but they left behind undeniable evidence on their own lives. In trying to harm you, they ended up leaving a permanent mark on themselves. That mark isn't just guilt, it's a spiritual stain that follows them wherever they go. What's fascinating is that the more they tried to make you look weak, the weaker they became. They thought the fire was proof of their power, when in reality it was proof of their recklessness. You stood inside that fire and walked out standing, but they walked away carrying burns that never heal. That's why they keep trying to distract people, why they can't sit still, why they can't rest at night. The brand of their own cruelty is carved into their conscience, whether they admit it or not. This is why you never have to convince anyone of what really happened. The evidence is alive in them, their behavior betrays them, their instability exposes them. The same fire they used to try to define you is now the evidence that defines them. People can pretend not to see it, but the cracks always show. You don't have to announce their guilt. Life announces it for you. And here's where the irony stings the most for them. What was meant to bury you ended up branding them permanently. They thought they were controlling your story, but they were only writing their own downfall. Every scheme, every insult, every trap has now become part of the testimony against them. They can run, they can deny, they can act unbothered, but the burn marks of their choices speak louder than any excuse they make. So while you've risen from the ashes with clarity and strength, they are the ones stuck with scars they can't hide. The fire they started never defined your end, it defined theirs. And now, no matter how far they go or how loudly they laugh, that brand remains, a silent reminder that they lit a flame that was never in their control. Number 4, they mistook God's patience for permission. They mistook God's patience for permission, and that mistake is what will cost them everything. When they mocked you, slandered you, and dragged you through trials that were never theirs to create, they looked around and saw no immediate consequence. No sudden collapse, no thunder from the skies, no dramatic punishment that shook their world. In their ignorance, they read that silence as approval. They assumed that because God didn't strike instantly, he must have been indifferent or worse, supportive of their actions. But patience from heaven is never permission. It's a setup. God's delay isn't weakness, and it's not neglect. It's the stretching of time so that every hidden thing can fully expose itself. They thought they got away with what they did because nothing happened overnight. But in truth, every extra day was a rope being let down, not for their victory, but for their undoing. That rope wasn't to help them climb higher, it was to give them enough space to tie their own noose. Patience is God's way of letting people reveal who they really are when they think no one is watching. And they revealed everything. The irony is that the very silence they laughed at is the silence that sealed their judgment. When heaven doesn't respond quickly, it's not because justice is absent, it's because justice is stacking. Their actions didn't fade into the air, they accumulated weight. Every cruel word, every manipulative move, every plot against you was placed on a scale, and the longer God waited, the heavier that scale became. Now what they face isn't a reaction to one wrong, but a reckoning for everything piled together. They wanted peace without accountability, but the stillness they misread was never peace. It was the calm before the storm. Just like a sky that looks quiet before lightning cracks it open, God's pause was the countdown before impact. And when that moment comes, there is no bargaining, no reversing, no pretending it never happened. The wrath doesn't just fall lightly. It falls with the full weight of accumulated silence. So they can laugh for now, they can boast for now, but the delay was never in their favor. God's patience was the loading of a bowstring, and when it finally releases, the strike will be too precise, too heavy, and too final to mistake for coincidence. Number 5. They lit a fire that consumes their lineage. They lit a fire that consumes their lineage, and that's the terrifying reality they never factored in. When they targeted you, they thought it was just between you and them, a petty battle they could win with lies, manipulation, or cruelty. But chosen ones are not isolated souls. You're part of a divine assignment that stretches beyond your own lifetime. That means every attack against you doesn't just linger in the present, it spills into the future. The curse they unleashed through their actions doesn't end with them. It stains their bloodline, poisoning what comes after them. This is why their choices carry a weight they cannot escape. In the spiritual realm, every seed produces after its kind. What they sowed in torment, in cruelty, in wickedness, is now reproducing in their children and their children's children. They thought they were building security for their families while tearing yours down. But what they were actually doing was writing instability into their own legacy. Corruption, loss, and decay become the inheritance for those connected to their blood. That's not something money can erase, and it's not something reputation can cover up. It's embedded into the fabric of their line because of what they dared to do against a chosen one. The generational effect is what makes their arrogance so tragic. They imagined they could abuse and then move on as if nothing happened, but heaven does not measure actions in isolation. Actions ripple, and the ripple becomes a tide. Their descendants will struggle with fires they never started, walking through smoke-filled air without even knowing why life feels so heavy, so chaotic, so cursed. That's the invisible inheritance born out of the cruelty they thought was harmless. And here's where it gets painfully clear. You survived what they threw at you, but their own blood won't escape the aftershocks. You rose out of the ashes refined, but they chained their lineage to the fire. Every time they laughed at your suffering, every time they enjoyed watching you burn, they were adding wood to a flame that is now turning on their own house. This is why touching a chosen one is never just about the present moment. It rewrites the future. The fire they thought they had under control is now devouring everything connected to them. Their lineage didn't ask for it, but they will inherit it, because the flame of rebellion doesn't just scorch the guilty, it stains the generations. Number 6. Their power was never theirs. They were borrowing time. Their power was never theirs. They were borrowing time. That's the part that makes their arrogance so laughable now. They strutted around as if they were untouchable, acting like the influence they carried was permanent, like the doors they opened for themselves could never be shut. They gloated over you, mistaking temporary privilege for eternal authority. But what they never understood is that any power outside divine alignment is rented, not owned, and sooner or later the contract runs out. This is why their downfall always feels sudden to the outside world. One moment, they're at the top of their game, loud, confident, and parading their supposed strength. The next moment, they collapse without warning, stripped of everything they thought was theirs forever. But nothing was ever truly theirs. It was only tolerated for a season, allowed for a purpose. The same power they used to humiliate you was never under their control. It was always subject to divine recall. And when heaven decides the time is up, there are no extensions. The tragedy is that they built their entire identity on that borrowed energy. Without it, they are exposed as hollow. The influence, the reputation, the fear they inspired in others, that was the mask. Take it away, and what remains is emptiness. That's why losing it drives them into panic and desperation. They aren't just losing opportunities. They're losing the very illusion of who they believed themselves to be. They built a throne out of smoke, and now the wind has blown it away. For chosen ones, this should serve as a reminder. Their gloating was never about real strength. It was noise on borrowed breath. And now, that breath has been taken back by the one who gave it in the first place. The same people who once mocked your struggle will soon be begging for relevance, scrambling to hold on to the scraps of what they once flaunted. But there's no glory in what doesn't belong to you, and no future in what heaven has already repossessed. So while they laughed, thinking they owned the stage, they were just temporary actors in a play whose script was never written by them. Their time was always limited, their power was always conditional. And now that the curtain has dropped, their collapse is not just punishment, it's exposure. Number 7. They wanted you to break, but they broke their own spirit. They wanted you to break, but they broke their own spirit. That's the outcome they never predicted. Every scheme, every cruel word, every calculated move was designed to chip away at you until nothing was left. They thought if they pressed hard enough, humiliated you long enough, and isolated you consistently enough, you would finally collapse. But chosen ones aren't wired like that. What they didn't understand is that the more pressure you face, the more your soul strengthens. What was meant to shatter you became your training ground, and instead of breaking, you rose higher than they could ever imagine. But here's the twist. While you were growing stronger in the fire, they were silently deteriorating. The energy it takes to keep up cruelty is not sustainable. Hatred eats its own host. Every lie they spread, every trap they set, every night they spent obsessing over you was draining their spirit piece by piece. They thought they were breaking you, but they were actually breaking themselves from the inside out. That's why their laughter doesn't sound the same anymore. Why their confidence feels hollow. Why no amount of distractions can cover the emptiness within them. The truth is, your resilience exposed their fragility. The fact that you didn't fold under pressure forces them to confront a reality they can't stomach. They wasted all their energy trying to destroy someone who was unbreakable. That realization eats at them. They see you thriving where they expected you to fall, glowing where they expected you to decay, and it mirrors back their own failure. And that's why they can't face their reflection anymore. Their mirror doesn't just show them, it shows the wreckage of their intentions. The more you stand tall, the smaller they feel. The more peace you carry, the louder their torment becomes. They set out to damage your soul, but ended up exposing the cracks in theirs. Now they walk around with a spirit that is fragmented, bitter, restless, and unstable, while you carry the kind of strength they can't buy or fake. In the end, the breaking never touched you. It circled back and consumed them. They became the very thing they wanted you to be, fractured, defeated, and unable to rebuild. And that is the justice they never saw coming. Number 8. Their rage was never about you. It was about God in you. Their rage was never about you. It was about God in you. That's the deeper layer behind their obsession, their jealousy, and their constant need to attack. On the surface, they made it seem personal. They pointed at your flaws, criticized your choices, mocked your lifestyle, and convinced others that their hostility was justified. But that was never the real issue. The real fire in their chest came from the fact that you carried something they could neither explain nor control. It wasn't your personality that offended them. It was the presence you carried. The chosen walk with an unseen authority that unsettles people who live in darkness. Without saying a word, your spirit announces itself, and those who resist the light can't stand it. They felt it every time you entered a room, that invisible weight of divinity that didn't need to brag, didn't need to shout, didn't need to prove itself. It was simply there, and it reminded them of everything they lacked. That's why their hatred ran so deep. They weren't just rejecting you, they were rejecting what you represented. And here's the harsh truth. They wanted to fight God, but couldn't, so they settled for you as the target. You became the punching bag for their unresolved war against divinity. They hated the way your life contradicted their lies. They hated how your endurance exposed their weakness. They hated how your faith highlighted their emptiness. And because they couldn't lash out at heaven itself, they tried to break the vessel heaven was using. That's why their rage always felt excessive, unreasonable, even irrational. It was never about the little things they accused you of. It was about something far larger, something spiritual. You triggered their inner conflict simply by existing. They saw you, but what they really reacted to was the reflection of God shining through you. The most powerful part of this is that you didn't even have to fight back to win. Your survival alone has been enough to prove that their war was doomed from the start. You cannot extinguish a flame that wasn't lit by human hands, and so their rage has only left them drained, while the presence they tried to fight remains unshaken. They didn't war against you, they warred against God in you, and that's a battle no one has ever won. Number 9. Their attempts at control created their own chaos. Their attempts at control created their own chaos. And that's the part they'll never admit out loud. They believed they could dictate your life, steer your destiny, and keep you boxed into a role that served them. They tried silencing your voice, limiting your opportunities, twisting your story so it would fit into their narrative. They imagined themselves as master strategists, pulling strings and moving pieces on a board where they thought you were just a pawn. But every move they made to trap you only destabilized them. Control rooted in fear always collapses. They couldn't see that the very energy it takes to manipulate, monitor, and suppress another person ends up draining the one doing it. While they were busy setting snares for you, they neglected their own foundation. While they obsessed over keeping you down, they were eroding their own ground. That's why their lives look so messy now. Broken relationships, restless nights, sudden losses, and constant confusion. It's not coincidence. It's the fruit of their own obsession. What they thought was orchestration was actually self-sabotage. They fancied themselves as conductors of a grand symphony of domination, convinced they were in full control of the melody. But what came out of their efforts wasn't music. It was noise. Every scheme, every manipulation, every whispered lie only added more dissonance to their lives. Instead of harmony, they created chaos. Instead of building power, they dismantled their own peace. Meanwhile, you kept rising. The more they tried to cage you, the more obvious your resilience became. The tighter they gripped, the more they lost. And that's what stings them most. The realization that in trying to contain you, they revealed just how powerless they actually were. They didn't destroy you. They destroyed the illusion of their own control. Now they're left standing in the ruins of their own making, unable to figure out how the trap flipped back on them. The truth is simple. No one can control what heaven has already liberated. Their hands were never strong enough to hold what God placed in motion. And in trying, all they did was orchestrate the soundtrack of their own downfall. Number 10. The torture you endured became evidence for judgment. The torture you endured became evidence for judgment, and that is where their arrogance will meet its end. They thought your suffering was invisible, that it would vanish into the cracks of memory, covered over with denial or rewritten by their lies. They laughed while you cried, thinking no one was keeping score. But what they didn't realize is that every tear, every bruise, every humiliation was being preserved as evidence. Not against you, but against them. Nothing was wasted. Nothing went unseen. Every moment of cruelty became a recorded testimony waiting for its day in court. This is why divine justice doesn't need rumor, gossip, or human witnesses to decide. Heaven doesn't operate on speculation or opinion. It operates on proof, and the proof is airtight. The evidence against them is not built on stories twisted by biased tongues. It's built on undeniable reality. They can deny what they did. They can pretend it wasn't as bad. They can try to manipulate others into believing their version of events. But none of that erases the file heaven has on them. That file is complete, unalterable, and damning. The irony is that the very things they thought would weaken you are the same things strengthening the case against them. They mocked your tears, but each one became a piece of evidence. They laughed at your pain, but each scar became a line in the testimony. They gloated at your humiliation, but every moment of endurance built a wall of proof they can't climb over. The same history they hoped you'd bury has been building the foundation of their judgment all along. And when that judgment falls, it won't be light or arguable. It will be final. They won't be able to talk their way out of it. They won't be able to charm, manipulate, or explain it away. Because judgment in heaven's court is not based on perception. It's based on truth. The punishment that comes is measured, precise, and undeniable. So while they thought they were writing your end, they were actually writing their own verdict. The torture you endured was never wasted. It was being gathered as evidence. And when the time comes, that evidence won't whisper. It will roar, sealing their fate with irrefutable proof of exactly what they did. Number 11. They turned a test into a trial. They turned a test into a trial, and that is where their downfall was sealed. What God allowed in your life was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to shape you, refine you, and prepare you for greater responsibility. Tests are part of every chosen one's journey. They stretch your faith, sharpen your endurance, and deepen your wisdom. But instead of standing aside or even unknowingly playing their small role in that process, your enemies took it upon themselves to interfere. They didn't just watch you go through a season of testing. They piled on cruelty to make it unbearable. That decision changed everything. There is a difference between being part of a divine lesson and choosing to become an agent of torment. When they mocked you, when they spread lies, when they deliberately added weight to an already heavy season, they crossed from participation into rebellion. They weren't helping refine you. They were trying to break you. They weren't part of the fire designed to purify. They were trying to smother you in smoke. And heaven does not ignore that kind of interference. What they failed to realize is that a test is always temporary. It has an appointed beginning and an appointed end. But by converting it into deliberate torture, they extended the pain unnecessarily, and in doing so, they built a case against themselves. Your suffering was never going to last forever, but the record of their cruelty will. What was once a divine test for you has now become an eternal indictment for them. And here's the twist. The very trial they manufactured ended up proving your strength and exposing their corruption. You came out of it stronger, wiser, more aligned with God's purpose. They came out of it with blood on their hands. Your endurance elevated you, but their choices condemned them. They thought they were righting your failure, but they were only carving their own judgment deeper into stone. This is why their downfall isn't just about karma or consequences. It's about divine justice. They took what was sacred, what was meant to refine, and they defiled it with cruelty. By doing so, they turned your test into their trial. And while you graduate from it with honor, they remain bound by the very charges their own hands created. Number 12. God didn't just watch, He weighed their intent. God didn't just watch, He weighed their intent. That's the piece that makes their judgment inescapable. Many people think consequences only come from what was done outwardly, but in heaven's court, it goes deeper than actions. It reaches into the why. Every hidden motive, every secret thought, every dark delight they carried in their heart was part of the crime. They didn't just hurt you by accident, they chose to. They didn't just stumble into cruelty, they plotted it. And that is what made their actions heavier than they ever imagined. While the world looks at results, heaven looks at intent. Some people may defend them, saying, "It wasn't that serious," or "Maybe they didn't mean it like that." But God's scales are precise, and they measure not just what happened, but the spirit behind it. That's why their laughter after your pain mattered. That's why their satisfaction when you struggled mattered. That's why the energy they poured into making sure you suffered mattered. It wasn't just what they did, it was how much they enjoyed doing it. This is where their downfall becomes undeniable. People can cover up actions. They can deny, excuse, or even convince others to overlook what they did. But no one can cover the heart from God. Intentions leave a fingerprint that cannot be erased. And in their case, those fingerprints are all over the crime scene of your suffering. Their delight in your downfall and their joy in your pain has been recorded in the same way as the act itself. And here's the part they never considered. God weighs intention heavier than action. Why? Because actions can sometimes be accidents, but intent is pure truth. If the thought was malicious, the act was already guilty before it even reached your life. They weren't simply participants in your pain. They were authors of it. That makes them accountable on a level they never expected. So when judgment falls, it won't just be about what the world saw. It won't just be about visible events. It will be about the hidden motives they thought no one could detect. The malicious laughter in secret rooms, the joy they felt at your tears, the smugness they carried when they thought you were finished, all of it sits on heaven's scales. And those scales never lie. Number 13. They created a battlefield they can't survive. They created a battlefield they can't survive, and that's where their miscalculation sealed their fate. When they dragged you into conflict, they believed it was just you against them. They thought it was a matter of social power, influence, or intimidation. A small-scale fight they could win by sheer force, manipulation, or numbers. But chosen ones don't walk alone. By declaring war on you, they weren't just targeting an individual. They were calling out the God who sent you. They thought it was a personal feud, when in reality, they had opened a war front against eternity itself. This is the mistake of the arrogant. They assume their strength is enough to handle anything, forgetting that human strength has limits. They mistook your quiet endurance as weakness, not realizing that your silence was backed by a greater power. Every scheme, every lie, every trap was like them firing bullets into the sky, only to realize too late that heaven responds with storms. They provoked a dimension of warfare they were never built to handle, and in that dimension, their influence means nothing. Their numbers mean nothing. Their titles, wealth, or connections mean nothing. They picked a fight with a force that doesn't lose. The more they fought, the more they exposed their fragility. While they grew tired, drained, and chaotic, you kept standing. While they scrambled to maintain control, you kept moving forward. They thought they were destroying you, but all they were doing was writing evidence of their own defeat. That's why their lives are unraveling now. Because the battlefield they built wasn't yours to survive, it was theirs to collapse in. And here's the sobering truth. Chosen ones are eternal in purpose. Even when you suffer, you rise again because your calling doesn't end in defeat. But your enemies are temporary, tied to fleeting positions, fragile egos, and earthly power. When they pitted themselves against you, they forgot the scale of the fight. You carry eternity, they carry expiration dates. That's why the outcome is already decided. They created a battlefield, but they're not equipped for the war they ignited. They tried to take you down, but in reality, they only challenged the one who sent you. And no one has ever survived a war against God. Number 14. Their end will be a lesson for others. Their end will be a lesson for others, because some punishments are too weighty to remain hidden. What they tried to do to you in secret will be undone in the open, and their collapse will not only be about justice, it will be about education. God doesn't just deal with offenders to settle accounts. He also uses their downfall as a message. What happens to them becomes a living warning sign, a divine billboard that says, "Touch not what carries fire." They thought their actions would be buried. They assumed they could get away with tormenting you behind closed doors with no trace, no exposure, no consequence. But heaven has a way of turning private cruelty into public judgment. When their time comes, it won't just be whispers. It will be undeniable, visible, and loud. Others will see, and others will learn. The same crowd that may have once laughed with them will stand shocked as they watch their fall. This is the part that terrifies your enemies the most. Their punishment won't be something they can spin. No lies, no cover-ups, no manipulation of perception will rescue them when the scales tip. God makes sure their downfall cannot be mistaken for coincidence. It is clear, deliberate, and memorable. People watching will not just see a person failing, they will see the cost of touching what God set apart. And the echo of their end will travel further than they imagine. Friends, family, associates, even strangers who once entertained thoughts of treating another chosen one the way they treated you will pause and reconsider. Fear will spread not because of you, but because of what was proven through you. Their collapse will show the world that chosen ones aren't ordinary targets and that the fire they carry doesn't burn out. It burns back. That's why their end isn't just about retribution. It's about preservation. It's about God making sure no one else forgets the boundaries of His protection over you. Their fall becomes a memorial, a constant reminder in the minds of those who witness it that some battles are too dangerous to start. And from that day forward, your name will no longer be tied to the pain they caused, but to the lesson their punishment taught the world. Here's the truth that ties it all together. Chosen ones. What they did to you was never going to vanish into thin air. Every plot, every act of cruelty, every ounce of pain they caused was recorded in heaven's ledger. They mistook silence for approval. They mistook patience for weakness, and they mistook you for ordinary. But in every step, God was stacking the weight of justice higher. Now that weight is crashing down, and they're realizing too late that they lit a fire they can't put out. Your survival isn't just proof of resilience, it's proof of divine backing. Their collapse isn't just punishment, it's instruction. Through you, God is showing the world that chosen ones don't fall by the hands of those who hate them. Instead, it's the enemies who dig graves for themselves, who summon storms they can't withstand, and who end up as lessons carved into history. So walk boldly, because your story is not one of defeat, but of elevation. What was once torture has become testimony. What was once their victory dance has become their funeral song, and what they thought was the end of you has become the end of them. Family, if this word has stirred your spirit and opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like this video, drop a comment, and share it with someone who needs this truth. Stay tuned, because your story isn't just being written, it's being revealed. And trust me, the best part is still ahead. Chosen ones, before you go, make sure you don't keep this word to yourself. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. Like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with someone who needs this truth in their spirit right now. Every time you engage, you help spread the message further. And trust me, there are people out there who need this reminder of God's justice and protection. Stay connected, stay sharp, and stay covered. God bless you.